Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Karen Weaver. When I launched this podcast in 2020, I chose the title Trustees and Presidents because both are key to effective leadership and governance. While we usually think about the academic, legal, and real estate oversight responsibilities that trustees have, rarely does the topic of athletics oversight come up unless there is a PR crisis or a football coach's contract. Boy, did that change in the last month.
I don't have a problem getting my colleagues to speak up on this issue. So, we only have 8 people on our board, so it's much easier to communicate amongst us and we make decisions together. And we have been in contact with each other on this issue, not just daily, almost hourly, since we first heard about it. And this is something that we communicate with each other about a lot and that we have decided to have some independence on as far as our oversight and seeking more information, not only insisting on getting the information we need to evaluate this, but bringing in outside independent third party people to provide additional analysis for us to review.
The Big Ten Conference and the University of California Pensions Funds Investments, also known as UCI, are discussing entering into a very, very big financial deal that could last 20 years or longer and involve the UC system acquiring 10% of the conference's newly created LLC, in effect being a partner with the 18 other schools. Very, very few trustees have been given the details at each institution, which is really surprising to so many. Even more surprising, more than a few are speaking out against the deals. Here with the ACTA's perspective is Armand Alacbay, the Chief of Staff and Senior Vice President of Strategy. Armand oversees ACTA's trustee and government relations projects and coordinates priorities across the organization's programmatic portfolio. He also co-led a fascinating webinar last week on this very topic. Armand, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So you started off the podcast with this great story and this great analogy about the owner of the Indianapolis Colts. Walk us through that.
So at ACTA, we conduct board trainings, all over the country, 23,000 trustees, both public and private four-year institutions. But so you have a lot of different boards with a lot of different levels of involvement and scope of responsibilities. So the analogy I like to use with boards is that you're often it's like being on a board of a university or college is like being the owner or part owner of a professional sports franchise. And that's because you really have little to do with on-field performance. You're not calling plays, you're not drafting players necessarily, you're not running practices. But as any sports owner can tell you, you're the one who's on the line. You're the one who the fans are going to call for to be ejected if your franchise isn't doing well. So that's the baseline. But one thing that it's been interesting this whole year in the NFL is seeing Carly Ursay-Gordon, the new owner of the Indianapolis Colts, and her practice of walking the sidelines, watching the game from the sidelines, wearing the coach's headset, listening in on plays. And so even in this webinar, we're talking about how people were criticizing her for micromanagement, right? And her response, I'd recommend this for anybody who has to make $1 million decisions on coaches and GMs. You can make fewer mistakes that way. And I thought that was really endearing and just a good way to demonstrate being engaged and active without violating shared governance, so to speak.
So we're not advocating for trustees to be on the sidelines with headsets, but you're talking about what kind of engagement, what might that look like in the athletics context?
What will come out of this controversy will be far more engaged boards all over the nation that will recognize that they have a particular responsibility now, especially with all of the federal engagement with colleges and universities. It is not a time when they can be complacent or underinformed and need, when necessary, to make it clear that they are the final arbiters of what happens at the university. And to be specific, that the president or chancellor answers to them. I would hope that one very specific thing will come out of this, that every college and university board would have an athletics oversight committee in order to give very precise very timely information.
I think the basic thing is to have an athletics committee. So right now, I actually serve on the board of George Mason University, and we just amended our bylaws recently to establish an athletics committee, not just for oversight purposes, but also to, I would say, to signal to the university community, look, this is an area that is just as much of a priority for our attention as everything else that's core mission. We often talk about how college sports are like the front porch of the institution, right? It's the way that most or many people, I would say, first interface with a university before they even step through the door or step on campus.
It's really true. And it absolutely boggles my mind that this wasn't an automatic committee established like 20 years ago. Why do you think it's taken so long?
Well, I think now it's becoming really clear how complex the area is. I mean, between name, image, likeness, conference realignment. I mean, gosh, right now, the elephant in the room is sports betting, right? And how that's going to affect student athletes, how it's going to affect institutions generally. I mean, you see it in professional sports and in college. I think you can have even more catastrophic issues there. Now, those are just a few things, but it's just become a lot more complicated. College football, for example, is, as terms of viewership, the second most watched sport in the nation. So
Yeah, it's crazy.
it's overdue.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think that trustees probably fall into two or three camps where one is a huge college sports fan, another one probably says, I don't know anything about sports and I really don't care, or the third one says, well, if you teach me something I might be able to do. How do you help those folks get to the same place with content as a trustee?
Well, I think it depends on one, the subject matter expertise areas of those trustees, and two, where those intersect with the day-to-day business. So, for example, you may be a trustee and not necessarily not care at all about college sports, but you probably, if you serve on your board's land use committee, you're going to care a lot about things like stadium arrangements and how those work. If on the business end, there's so many things that have little to do with athletic performance per se, but are equally important to trustees, like coaches' contracts and the financial effects of that on the budget, and so forth. So I mean, you can't really escape sports, and even if you're not at a major big time FBS institution.
That makes sense. And in an ideal world, what kinds of advice slash guidance might trustees offer to presidents as they're looking to make some decisions like what the Big Ten is trying to do right now?
Right.
That we absolutely have to be engaged in the governance of our universities. We have a fiduciary duty to do that. So I totally agree with that. But I want to take a little different approach today. First, I want to note I'm speaking on behalf of USC as an individual trustee, not on behalf of the entire university. That's the province of our president and our board chair. But as a trustee, let me state that I'm proud we're a member of the Big Ten, certainly because of its leading tradition in athletics, but more important for its leadership in academic excellence and in research that has improved the lives of millions of people throughout this country and the world. It's that leadership that I believe the Big Ten must provide today. Let me explain. College football is America's most popular sport, not only behind the NFL. Having spent a lifetime in media, I can tell you that means it's the second most valuable content in America, growing more valuable every day. It's why the NFL, with $14 billion of annual revenues, wants to renegotiate its contracts years early because it believes it can get over $20 billion annually. It's why the NBA, with half of the consumer preference of college football, gets $7 billion per year, nearly twice the revenue of college football. The reason is simple. Colleges compete against each other, conference versus conference, and the result is a system that dramatically devalues college football. The estimates based on audience share are that college football should be getting $9 to $13 billion if it negotiated as one entity. This is where the leadership of the Big Ten needs to come in. The Big Ten should lead in uniting all of college football in solving this problem, not trying to solve it by further withdrawing from the rest of America and taking private equity-like investments and diluting its value. Even if college football only reached the bottom level of these estimates, $9 billion annually, think of what that could mean for our football student athletes, our Olympic athletes, our non-revenue athletes, and our fiscally challenged athletic departments. The current crisis in intercollegiate athletics would be solved. Every university in America would benefit from our leadership, yet the Big Ten would be the prime beneficiary because media dollars will follow audience, as they always have, and the Big Ten will provide more audience than anyone else. Now is the time for the conference to lead, as it has always led, and find a national solution that intercollegiate athletics desperately needs. I know many schools need revenues now, and we can find those revenues now without selling a critical piece of our future. As trustees, we have a fiduciary duty to be engaged in the governance of our universities. It is critical to the future of higher education that we do so. The Big Ten has always provided America leadership. Now is the time to do it again.
I think the most important thing, and just looking at the whole Big Ten situation, is keep your board informed. The big dispute right now with that situation is just that there were quite a few trustees and regents at multiple institutions that felt that they were not getting sufficient information to make a decision of the scope and scale that transaction required. I mean, you're looking at a $2.4 billion private equity deal. I mean, that's the shorthand, and that being a 20-year contract in and of itself sends off red flags. Look, this is something that you need board oversight, or you need a board say on. I mean, the fact that there were some board members who were told that this was a non-voting issue for them, I mean, wow. Frankly, that's preposterous. I mean, this is it's a question of fiduciary duty, and that's regardless of whatever your state laws are. I mean, on its face, a 20-year agreement with that much money in play, I mean, how many of those college presidents are actually going to still be at their institutions in 20 years? How many of those board members are still going to be there in 20 years?
That's right. It's a really good point. And in fact, there were several points that I noticed that I want to really run through with you. But the other thing I want to add to your commentary are the interests from lawmakers. For example, the senator from Washington State, Maria Cantwell, said in an article yesterday, the legal and financial landscape of college sports has changed substantially over the years, and it is now a multi-billion-dollar industry whose growth and potential growth have attracted the attention of private equity and venture capital investors. She's questioning whether we should still be nonprofits. And that's a fair question. If Congress is asking about that, should trustees be brought up to speed with that?
Well, just even at a more base level, right? You have a decision that's being made by this conference, whose board is governed by the presidents and chancellors of these 18 institutions, 16 of which are public, right? One would think that the people of the state of Michigan or Ohio or Pennsylvania or Illinois, Indiana, Maryland, et cetera, right, would want to have a say here. So, I mean, the whole, my whole interest in this issue is the fact that trustees are the one constituency on campus whose sole job is to mediate conflicting interests. So, think about it this way: every constituency on a college campus has their own incentives, right? And oftentimes there are going to be values and incentives that are going to come in conflict. The classic one, tuition, right? Yeah. So students have a vested interest in keeping tuition as low as possible, whereas for budgetary reasons, that may become a necessity because of other financial exigencies at the institution that are going to benefit other constituencies. But your job as a trustee is to figure out what's that happy medium. And with public institutions, it's even more important because you throw taxpayers into the mix, right?
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, I think that there's kind of the fact of there's this potential mix of lots of private money going into these public entities with some sort of dilution, shall we say, of public oversight that should raise, alarm bells anywhere.
Does it concern you the amount of deference and handed off power that presidents have been giving to the conference commissioners in some of these situations?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the scope and scale of this one transaction alone, or proposed transaction, should give every board across America pause. Because this is not going to be the last of this deal. It just so happens that it's the Big Ten, one of the two big power conferences in the country. But I can't imagine a board, particularly those on these FBS schools, that shouldn't be looking at this thinking, well, what am I not hearing about? Right. So, I mean, I was just listening the other day to Jordan Acker, Regent at the University of Michigan, talk about this, where their board received 200 pages of materials the night before they were supposed to make a decision. I mean, that's just, I can't think of any decision that you can make under those circumstances, much less one of that level of import.
The webinar that you all did last week, and I'll certainly put the link in the liner notes for folks to listen to, had the Regent from Maryland, Tom McMillan, on it. And Tom has been very outspoken about the lack of information that the Maryland Regents have gotten. And I find it kind of interesting because back when the Big Ten approached Maryland about joining them,
Exactly.
it was the same situation. The Regents were just supposed to smile and nod and approve. And I don't blame Tom for being frustrated that once again, this is what's happening.
No, and
What
if
are
you
your thoughts?
recall, Tom was the lone vote objecting to that deal, not on the merits, right? It's just that that's not the kind of thing you decide over a weekend. I mean, Maryland was a founding member of the ACC.
That's right.
So I come from ACC country. I know how important that is.
Yeah, absolutely. And you had regions from Minnesota, Michigan, USC. So it was a wide range of public and private institutions who are all saying, we need information. And I think what my understanding is that these two sides that agree, the UCI, the investment firm, and the conference in the form of the commissioner, get into this accelerated transaction where a decision has to be made now because it's on the table now, not regarding the 18 to 36 people who need to be involved in it on every campus.
Right. Well, and there's actually, I think you could draw parallels here between this and a lot of other situations that boards find themselves in. So if you think about it, by the time a board of trustees receives a proposal, whether it's for private equity deal for the athletic program or even a new academic program, right? There are a lot of people that have personally invested in this, that for years, oftentimes, and the trustees are getting at the tail end. Necessarily, that makes sense. There's this natural tendency not to say no, right? You don't want to disappoint people, but I mean, that's part of the hard decision that you have to make as a trustee. Is sometimes you have to say no or not yet to something, right? And there's really no other way around it. And well, here with this particular deal with the Big Ten, it was patently obvious that the boards were not getting enough information at all, right? And what's interesting about that story is that this sense of urgency behind how this deal needed to pass right now. I mean, if it was such a good deal, why not make it public and available to everybody to take a look at? That's what always confused me about this.
Yeah.
I mean, really only started seeing this about a month ago, right? And I again, with a number of different states, citizens' interests that are involved with this, I don't know. It just it didn't seem like that was the ideal way of trying to get buy-in from the
Oh,
public.
for sure. I had the president from St. Francis University in Pennsylvania, a small school, about 2,000 students, Division I for a long time, on the podcast to talk about why and how they got the decision to move to Division III. So starting next year, that's where they're headed. It was a very big decision, very traumatic in some ways, decision for the campus, the coaches, the alumni, that type of thing. It took them 2+ years of discussions to finally assess and accept where the landscape was. I mean, that's one kind of decision, but this is another.
Right. I mean, so as a governing board member, your job is to be receptive to all but beholden to none. So there's kind of two parts of that. The beholden to none part, that is you are there to provide your own independent judgment. You're not reporting to anyone. You're not reporting to your reporting authority. You're not reporting to the legislature. You're there for your own independent judgment. That's why you're there. But the receptive to all, that's important here too, because it means listening to every constituency that has a reasonable stake in this. Now, you may not agree with everybody on the decision, but you got to hear them out, and that takes time, right?
Yeah.
And so for a decision, so again, going back to the whole Big Ten deal, not only did the boards not know anything, but the campus communities didn't know anything. So how could they possibly even weigh into this? I mean, you don't have to get this is not a you don't have to have buy-in from necessarily every single person who could be affected, but your job is, at least as a trustee, is to make that good faith effort to find out how this would affect everybody.
Absolutely. And for the public universities, do they have an obligation to talk with their state legislatures and their U.S. senators and congresspeople?
I mean, yeah. In short, I mean, if there are people with reasonable interests in here, I mean, that is something that you need to do, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and again, who's affected just depends on the scope and scale of the transaction, but something like this is pretty big time.
Yeah, and as we said early on, it could really be one of those things that could take down a university if their finances aren't super, super secure, because these departments, even if they're operating by sending all of their revenue stuff up to Big Ten enterprises, which I believe is their structure,
Right.
that is still going to have implications if that structure fails. It will come back to the 18-member conference schools to pay the debts. Right.
Well, and again, that's assuming you keep it the same 18 over the course of 20 years. I mean, you have to project the fate of 18 different institutions over a 20-year cycle. And that's just not something you do in a month. I mean, I look at this situation and go, wow, how could anyone expect, any professional board, much less 18 of them, to have a reasonable amount of comfort that they've sussed this out, because there are legal implications, financial implications, and also there's no precedent to look at for this, right? This is,
That's right.
again, if this is such a good deal, why not make it transparent for all? It just boggles the mind.
It does. It really does. So from the webinar, I pulled out 5 key topics that I'd love for you just to talk to my students, my audience, about the role of the trustees. And the first thing is the boards must exercise full fiduciary oversight. So what does that look like?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, speak broadly about this, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, that depends on the decision. I mean, it goes back to that receptive to all but beholden to none. So as a fiduciary, you're the one body that's there to be the true accountability center, right? So for public universities, if you are 2/3 of public universities or 2/3 of states, most of the public university boards are appointed by the state governor, right? And so there, if you don't do a good job, the governor's held accountable. That's the whole way that runs. But then you're there also to provide your independent judgment too. So as a fiduciary, your primary duty is to the people of the state. In most cases, there are some states that actually spell that out explicitly. I can think of 3: Virginia, Ohio, and Connecticut. But I mean, you could say the same for pretty much any public institution, that ultimately taxpayers are the ones that are the ones to whom you're ultimately accountable. And that's by design, because no one else is in an institution, and everybody has different incentives. Your job is to mediate all of those, and ultimately public institutions are public goods.
Yeah, for sure. So we talked a little bit about this, but give a little bit more broader context. Transparency and independent evaluation are essential.
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, and that takes time, right? So even in routine board meetings, right? Our state secretary of education here in Virginia just addressed us, board members, and recommended that we insist on our materials having them 2 weeks in advance of board meetings, right? It's typically, and I think that board members should expect or should insist that those materials are complete, that you're not getting quite as many last minute changes before the meeting time.
Mhm.
They
Yeah.
have to be concise yet comprehensive, is what I like to say. Um, that it covers the scope of everything you want to talk about in the meeting, but doesn't bury you in death by PowerPoint slides, right? So there's kind of it's, again, a lot of this is driven by the size of the institution and the complexity of the things that you're handling. So, but I think for any board, I think 2 weeks is a reasonable time to insist on having that. And I mean, so transparency, that's also from a public transparency perspective. So public can see these materials, but also for you as a board member to have adequate lead in.
You mentioned this earlier, but I really want to emphasize that this is such a critical point. We don't think of this normally in athletics, but longer term consequences must be considered. And that's part of the huge red flag in this deal. Why does it need to be 20 years? Why does it need to be now?
Right. And also, I don't think those questions have been answered, right? And
Yeah.
that is the first question you should ask as a board member when you have any type of long-term transaction, whether it's 6, 10, 20 years, is just, okay. And especially when it's something that that is being asked with urgency, right? The question you think you should ask, I think that board should ask is, well, what is driving that urgency? And is it, avoidable urgency? Is this, or is this, or, you know, um, if you'd be less charitable, is this manufactured urgency, right? And not trying to ascribe ill will to anybody, but it's just, there always has to be a reason why you're being told things at the time that you are.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I wondered, whether in this situation, did the UC say, well, we've got a chunk of money to invest. If we don't invest it with you, we'll find somebody else to invest it with,
Well, I
right?
mean, I don't know anything about that in particular, but I mean,
Yeah, neither. I'm
but I do know
speculating.
that there are a lot of entities, I'll just say, that are probably looking at this environment right now, this
Yeah.
changing environment, and going, what can we do best here? And so I can imagine that if it's UC one day, it's gonna be someone else another day, and it's just
Yeah.
it's a matter of what's best for my institution, not just now but long term. Because one of the biggest differences between being on the governing board of a institution of higher education versus being on a corporate board is your frame of reference as far as what the future is. So on a corporate board, you're typically looking, you may be in spans of years, maybe 5-10 years out. Well,
Okay.
for institution of higher education, your product is education of the whole of the person.
Okay.
People typically don't appreciate or understand the value of their own college experience until 10, 20 years down the line. So all that is to say, when you're serving on a governing board, your frame of reference needs to be generations and not years, right?
Okay.
I mean, remember, just a few generations ago, a century ago, the most popular sports in the nation were horse racing, baseball, and boxing, right?
Yeah,
What's to
that's
say
right.
that
Yeah.
football, in its present form, is going to be as popular as it is, as it is now, 20 years from now? I have no idea.
Or they say we're going to consume media the way we consume it today, and we're willing to pay what we're paying.
Exactly.
We don't know how it's going to
We're
change.
seeing that now with just the industry of live streaming and
Yes,
cable TV.
absolutely, absolutely. This is something that I think needs a little bit more reminder to people that governance structures need to evolve.
Mhm.
And I think within boards, we sort of get stuck in our committees. We get stuck. Well, so and so is always the chair of that committee. How can boards be more effective in keeping themselves fresh?
Number one, have a governance committee. I mean,
Okay.
you have to talk about the meta of how you conduct business as a board. So I know, for example, like a lot of the regional accreditors require that boards do some sense of, some self-evaluation every X number of years or every year or whatever it is. But I mean, that's something that boards need to be doing proactively, right? Like, so this whole 14 days question, well, what actually makes sense for your board, right? Given the velocity of information, given the number of people on your board. Questions that the governance committee should be asking include, how many people are appropriate? Is it appropriate to have on this board? So one thing I've noticed is, between public institutions and private institutions tend to have much larger rosters of people,
I
and
think
I
so
get
too.
why, right?
Yes, yes.
There's um, but I think it's a worthwhile exercise to ask, does that make for effective governance, right? If you are a body of 56 people, I mean, how do you function, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so it's things like that. Things like, what committee should you have? Taking fresh looks at the bylaws. Governance does have to evolve, but for that to happen, you need people who genuinely care about the integrity of the institution. And what I mean by that is, this is a thankless job. It doesn't pay very well, and typically the people who are chosen to serve on these boards are really, really busy people. And so this is just one small part of one element of, of their life or their lives. And oftentimes they don't have dedicated staff, right? I can only think of really only a few that stick out there where they have dedicated research staff, like University of Alabama, for example. Their assistant board has a staff member who reports directly to the board, who does, I mean, a lot, let's just say, as far as preparation, research, and that kind of stuff. So policy, research, etc. So anyway, all of these things are things that the board should consider, but it all comes down to having a committee, just like having an athletics committee or just like having an academic affairs committee that's committed to what I'd call the board meta, if you will.
Quick question about that. For public universities, are the board sizes and representation determined by the state or by the school?
They are all that I've seen are determined by the state.
Okay.
So yeah, there are a couple of kind of interesting permutations. University of Michigan, as you know, they're elected statewide.
Yes.
And Nebraska, kind of a similar situation. Actually, the 4 states, it's Nebraska, Michigan, Colorado, and Nevada, I believe. I'm not sure if
Okay.
that's changed since, but yeah, all of those are set by the state. I don't think there's an optimal, this is the one.
Okay.
There are ways that you can, public institutions, there are ways to mitigate partisanship by staggering things, right? That's kind of one thing that you can do by staggering board terms opposite of the appointing authorities, so you always get a mix of folks. The one thing I will say in favor of gubernatorial appointment is that because it's a board, right, and it has to function corporately, ideally you want to ensure that you have the right mix of different skill sets. So for example, you might want to have a make sure that board roster always has somebody who is steeped in cybersecurity, right? Like, or has a security like a government security clearance or legal or whatnot. And so some of the other more organic, like some of the more organic forms of a board member selection might not necessarily create those situations, and whereas a governor can do that intentionally, right, as a singular appointing authority.
Yeah.
But again, like I said, this is the silver bullet, right? I mean, some of the I've spoken with some of the best trustees that I've worked with have come from all different kinds of appointing arrangements.
Yeah. The last question I want to ask you, and I still feel like I'm sort of surprising myself by even discussing this, but the Big Ten is known for being so collaborative in their academic alliance, their medical research. It seems like every person in the department meets with their compatriot at the other schools several times a year, but boards don't necessarily do that. And I thought that your webinar really showed what happens when the board members reach out individually to each other. So how can we encourage more networking with peers?
Oh gosh, I mean, and it's I think it's by breaking down that perception that we're somehow competing with each other. And now I realize institutions compete for students,
Yes.
and and yes, they compete athletically, right? But at the end of the day, we're all public fiduciaries, right? I mean, this is why I appreciate a lot of the state governors who prioritize statewide trustee training, for example. I mean, it's some of the best ideas that I've heard have been when you've had somebody from this corner of the state talking to a board member from a different institution, or even across the 4-year, 2-year lines, right? Because we're all working towards the same goal here, and so I think just kind of keeping that in mind is a good way to do that. And ACTA, I mean, what we try to do is we try to convene folks from different institutions all the time, right? Like just because we think that sometimes it's easier when you're talking with someone who isn't in the particular situation you're in, right? But
Right.
understands
Yes.
trusteeship. So we're always happy to take calls, happy to join our network, and if you got particular questions, I can always put you in touch with folks that board members with other board members who maybe deal with something similar. And that's actually kind of how this whole Big Ten thing started.
Yeah. I mean, you guys kind of exploded into view with your letter and all kinds of interesting things at a very important time. Armand, I really want to thank you for spending time with me, my students, my listeners, and giving us the lay of the landscape at a time when we need trustees more than ever. So I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, delighted.